Okay, so I'm just going to run through a real quick reminder of how Visual Basic works and some of the commands you'll see. This is sort of the review intro. The video is here. Visual Basic Express Notes. This is the file I created last year, or that I posted last year, that takes you through. Again, the idea here would be this is a quick reference sheet. This is not going to explain really well what input is, what output is, or anything else. But once we know what we're looking for, there'll be examples here that we can refer to. So just kind of going through it super quickly here. Input, obviously we need to get information from the user. Our two options are the input box, or our two main options, let's say, to let the user type are the input box and a text box on the screen. The code for each is essentially the same. This is how we use the text box, this is how we use the input box. One of the things you want to remember, of course, is when you're using the input box, you do need to have a variable there, or else your information is lost. And of course, I need to have my variables declared ahead of time as to the type, so that the computer can recognize that if it's reading in a number, it should be treated as a number. If it's reading in text, it should be treated as text. Both input boxes and text boxes assume strings automatically, and then if you dim them, it'll recognize something different. The main difference between them, of course, is the input box pops up, and so it forces the user to type in at that moment, where the text box allows the user to go to that text box whenever he or she chooses, type something in, hit a button to continue, and so on. Our output options, so printing on the screen, a label is a good way to print a single value. The and signs are used to tie together, or to concatenate is the word we use, a string with a variable with another string, a string here with a variable, and then in this case, format is just kind of changing the variable price to look the way we want it to look. Message box is another option. It's a pop-up box. Basically, this command would pop that up on the screen. You click OK. There are different options with message boxes. If you put a comma right around this point here, it'll give you the option to have an OK button and a cancel button, a yes/no option, and so on. So there's a list of options at that point. And list boxes are used when we have multiple things we want to print. We want to keep track of various outputs, or possibly when we're debugging a program, we want to see what is happening along the way. We can print the variable each time through a loop, for example, to see kind of what's happening. The number's changing. Oh, but wait a minute, at this point it becomes a value I didn't expect. And then VB tab allows us to tab in a list box, so we can kind of set things up in columns to look a little neater. And format options, the format command just allows us to print things a little differently. So by default, decimals appear, as many decimals as they can show. If we want it to be a specific number, these are our options. And OR, both available in Visual Basic. So if you're using an if statement and you want multiple things to occur, and is the one. If you want any one of a series of things to occur, OR is your option. So if the number is greater than 0, or the number is such and such, or somebody typed in a special password, or any one of those happening would execute the if statement. And our pretty standard mathematical operations, mod for modulus, and if you remember, modulus allows us to get the remainder from a division. Pretty valuable, probably use it more often this year than we did last. Variable types, there are some other options, but these are sort of the standards. You want something to be a string when you don't want it to be a number. You want the computer not to think of it as a number and not to try to do math on it. And then our various numeric options here. There are others, but this is probably all we need. Boolean value can be true or false. And again, we'll use these as we kind of go through. We use the term, or the command dim, to declare our variables. And then again, we sort of want to remember there's two possibilities here. We can either dim things at the very top of our code, the very top of our entire program, so that the value exists throughout the entire program, or sort of where we need it, with the idea that once we're done with it, it can be destroyed and not take up space in memory. And then just standard Visual Basic terminology. The objects are the things on the screen. The properties are the things that change how they appear on the screen. A button can be larger, smaller, changed color, location, and so on. Events are the things we can do to the objects on the screen. We can click on them, we can move our mouse over top of them, and so on. The equation, the main equation in programming, is the adder equation. The counting equation is basically a special addition of that. And anytime we have to keep track of a running total or a running count or a value that continues to change throughout our program, the form of it will look something like this. The sum is equal to whatever the sum already was plus the new number. So the calculation here is done and it's stored in here. The idea being that, of course, if we're looping around, the next time we get to this spot, the sum will be the new sum plus another new number, theoretically. That'll become our new updated sum. Counting, my count is 0, I add 1, it becomes 1. I see something that I want to count again, it's currently 1, I add 1 to it, it becomes 2, and the 2 gets stored. 2 plus 1 is 3, and so on. So counting, of course, is something we'll do a lot, and there is your equation to remember there. And concatenation can do the same sort of thing. I can create a sentence by adding word after word after word to the sentence. So whatever's in sentence already, probably nothing to start. Grab the new word if I found a new word, add it in. My sentence now is the. And then next time around, the new word is cat. My sentence now is the, add cat to the end of it. It's the cat. You can sort of see probably at this point that potential here is to have words stuck together without spaces between them. And if that's not what I want, of course, then I would do something with an and, a space, and then and the new word at that point. List box, to use the list box, listbox.items.add, and tab, the information's up before. Problem solving techniques. As our programs get bigger, and they will this year for sure in grade 12, you'll want to either break the problem down from the top or build it up from the bottom. If the problem is asking you to do something that's quite large, you'll sort of break it into pieces, chunk it, use those individual pieces and try to get them working. Bottom up is sort of the same idea, but essentially I want to start with this, and then once I have it working, kind of put it together to form something larger. So the top-down design idea is I break up my big problem into small pieces. Bottom up is I'm sort of starting with this, and now, hey, maybe I can use it to build something further down the road. What I was really trying to get to, of course, was the if and loops so that you could sort of see them. Now, again, this is a reference page. The idea is that you should be able to come here, see what's on the page, and then kind of make sure your program looks the same. If your program's not working and you're getting some sort of a syntax error, it's because you didn't type it correctly. And so these are the various options we have for ifs. We can have, of course, a complete if, else, end if inside of an if. We can have an if start and finish, followed by another one that starts and finishes. We just want to make sure we understand whether it's a series of different events, each of which needs its own if statement, or if it's a series of options based on the one thing, in this case, the value of a mark, and I can kind of handle them in a specific order, all as one big if statement with else if options. And then this down here explains kind of those same ideas. You can use the first one if you have basically one thing that you're looking at and one thing that's going to happen. This form can only be used when there's exactly one condition. I want to check to see if this is the case. If it is, great. If not, I don't do anything. The other ones, of course, sort of go through where they're appropriate in each case. And general notes, in case you've forgotten, else is that last case, handles everything else that hasn't already been dealt with. And in order can be used in if statements. And the idea is that the conditions of an if will be evaluated as true or false, and then the computer will decide to do this or not do this based on the fact that it was a true or false situation. My looping options, a specific number of times. I'm going to use a for loop. So as soon as I can say, I want this to happen 5 times, or I want this to happen based on the number that the person types that number of times, you're looking at your for loop. And again, just some options here to take a look at to be sure you know how to write it. We'll get to strings later. The do loop is your sort of final option for today. We're going to loop until something happens, meaning that until the condition is the stopping condition. We can also do while something's happening, meaning that the condition given is the continue condition. And as you can sort of see here, you can check for that condition at the start of the loop or at the end of the loop. And the programs will work differently based on whether I'm checking here or checking up here. If the condition fails at the start, the loop will never occur. If the condition is checked at the end, the loop will always happen at least one time and then potentially quit after that. Couple of very quick ideas about Visual Basic itself. For now, we're going to be using Visual Basic Windows Forms application. Probably won't get into too much else. We'll get into some class libraries, I guess, later on, but initially this is what I'm looking for. Call this junk. And of course, off to the side here is all of the various options that I have to add to my form. Clicking on them will just add them, and then I can kind of go from there. Each object on my screen has a list of properties over on the side here that can be changed. We want to change the appearance of this. We change these. When you click on an object, the sub that comes up is the one that is most common. You can change it, however, by being in the sub and choosing to change from a click to a double click, or from a double click to a key press, mouse click, mouse double click, mouse hover, and so on. So basically you're looking for the option of what you want to have happen with respect to the button to determine what the sub will be. Your code that is supposed to react will go in there. So super fast review, nothing there that you haven't done many times, but hopefully that will help you kind of refresh yourself and get started on this year's work.